North of the New York most visitors know, up above where the trains come out of the Park Avenue Tunnel, beyond the grimy greenness of Upper Central Park. This is Central Harlem and 117th Street between Lenox and 7th Avenues.
Everybody's talking about Harlem. Harlem is the place for me. Everybody's talking about Harlem. I'm gonna stay here till eternity. I can't live in the...
It's a block reasonably representative of the 3.5 square miles and 251 street corners where more than 210,000 Negroes live in the nation's biggest black ghetto. Tonight, we'll get to know that block. It's quite a block.
He said, I'm gonna pack my grip, going to another town to stay. People in Harlem don't mean me no good. Let you fuss and fight, drive me in my own neighborhood. But everybody's talking about Harlem. Harlem is the place for me. Everybody's talking about Harlem.
This is a CBS News special report. 117th Street, New York, New York. Here is CBS News correspondent Harry Reasoner.
Harlem is a name that means a city community where Negroes live, as well as a specific place in New York City. So when trouble started in Harlem 11 days ago, it was reasonable to fear that it might be a pattern for the long-expected trouble from the Negro North. Last week, in the first part of an attempt to understand that possible pattern, the mood and temper of Harlem, we broadcast a wide variety of views of leaders of Harlem. This week, CBS News correspondent Charles Kuralt has spent on one block of Harlem, because patterns of fear and trouble start with individuals, and sometimes individuals get lost in big surveys. Last Saturday, there was no repeat engagement of the previous weekend's Harlem riots. There were plenty of police around, but not really a lot for them to do. There was, finally, organized and effective encouragement for people to stay at home.
Community, that we might have it, and perpetually so. Do not become involved in any of the demonstrations this afternoon. You and your children, your husbands, your fathers, your mothers, your sisters, your wives, everybody, clear the streets this afternoon, lest you become involved in this great altercation which...
The only people out hoping for trouble were from the bitter side of Negro protest, the people who put out posters accusing policemen of murder, the people who urged violence. On Saturday, they tried briefly and without much support to start a protest march they had been told they could not have. The police stopped them easily because no substantial group of Harlem residents supported them. This was just a little eddy at the end of the big excitement. It took place on Lenox Avenue, and it brushed our block, 117th Street off Lenox, where Charles Kuralt was getting to know the people.
People who come from towns where the streets are named Oak or Maple or Main are always disturbed by the cold, anonymous sound of New York street names. It's true that 117th isn't exactly the most romantic or imaginative name for a street, but you shouldn't conclude from that 117th Street is just a line on the crosstown grid of Manhattan. This block between Lenox and 7th is as interesting and varied as your block, wherever you live. There's a grocery store, Mrs. Hobson's. Mrs. Hobson threw no bottles in the riot last week. We thought you might like to meet her and her son. This block has a couple of churches. A lot of people on 117th Street go to church. It has a political club, which is really a drinking club. A lot of people on 117th Street drink. This one block has about 3,000 people. There are as many differences among them as among any 3,000 people anywhere. They have one thing in common. They are all black. All except Dr. Wolf, the dentist here on the corner. He opened his practice here years ago when this block was interracial, and he's just stayed. There may be one or two others like him. So the people on 117th between 7th and Lenox are almost all black, and almost all poor, some very poor, and almost all dissatisfied, some miserable. But like a depressing small town, 117th Street still exerts its pull on people. They call themselves 17th Streeters, and even those who grew up here and moved away often come back. CBS News reporter Ben Holman and I, in talking to people on this block after the riots, found a number just back for a visit. One of those was Richard Herbert, who lives in the Bronx now. The reason for the riots, he said, was roughly the same reason he moved away.
As a youngster here on this block, what are some of the things that you saw?
As a youngster on 17th Street, I saw prostitution, dope peddling, number racketeers, every vice you can think of that's corrupted.
Why did these things go on here?
Because young men, 18, 17, 20, went downtown looking for jobs with high school diplomas, $35 a week, fellows with college degrees at $75 a week, which is wrong. They couldn't support a family on it. 2 kids, a family to take care of. So they stooped to the next lowest thing, the quick dollar. $150 a week, pushing numbers, selling dope. Fast dollar, something to take care of a family.
Why couldn't they get jobs?
Because the white man downtown said they weren't qualified.
Well, they had high school educations. Why weren't they qualified?
Because they were black.
Did the record have anything to do with it?
Yes, some records, as far as being locked up for pushing numbers, pushing dope, and they weren't given a second chance. I mean, if you commit a crime, I feel that 5 years after you committed a crime, if you've lived a normal, decent life after a period of 5 years, you should be given a chance, second opportunity to face life, society, and be something in this world. So your children can grow up and look at you and say, well, this is my father. He was wrong when he grew up, but today he's my father. He's accomplished something in life. He's part of society. That's all we want. We just want to be recognized. Give us a fighting chance. Don't condemn us because we sell dope or we steal. There's a reason for it. You say we riot. Yes, we riot and loot, but that's the explanation. The explanation for that is the fact that we don't have enough high-paying jobs. They won't give us a salary, the decent salary. I know they condemn the dope addict, say, well, he's no good. But why is he no good? There's a reason for him doing this. He's depressed. He can't find a decent-paying job, something to bring money to bring home to his family. So he goes for the quickest dollar. And you can't condemn the man for trying to take care of his family, to trying to be something. You go all around the world, and you come right back here to Harlem. It's the same thing. We just haven't been given a chance, a decent chance, a fighting chance. That's all we ask for, is equality. We don't want to be like you. We just want a fighting chance to say that we can take off a weekend, go fishing, go hunting, go downtown to a decent movie, enjoy life, have all the other luxuries in life that we should have, that the next man has.
One of this block's many have-nots is Edmund Woods. The things he has are an education, self-taught, a lingering illness, and a pervasive dislike of policemen.
Has there been much of a change in the personnel of the policemen assigned to this area recently?
Oh, they have changed policemen, but the attitude of the police hasn't changed in the least.
Have they assigned many Negro policemen to this block?
No.
None at all?
Hey, a few over a period of years I have seen Negro policemen assigned to this block, but none steady. None of them stayed any length of time. And they stay a while and they go. But none of them, I can't say that I know any Negro policeman by his name was assigned to this block.
Well, do you get along better with the Negro policeman than the white?
Well, it seems to be more communication, because things that I might be reluctant to say to a white policeman, I might say to a Negro policeman, and things that a Negro policeman might say to me that I would resent a white man saying, I won't resent him saying.
What about the recent rioting here in Harlem and in this area?
Well, I think that has been overplayed. First of all, they call it a riot. Mayor Wagner, he flew back from Europe. He said, it's been a riot. The Negro needs law and order. What is this, a sword of Damocles hanging over our heads? The students, every summer, you pick up the paper, you see in St. Augustine, Florida, that 2,000, 3,000 students They have a fight on the beach. They fight policemen. They throw beer bottles and everything. So they say, oh, those are just college kids. So these are just kids, people with no hope, lethargic, been having paternalism all their lives, not having no hope for tomorrow, not knowing where, half of the time, where the next meal is coming from. They're tired of the whole thing, more or less, and they just let off a little steam. That's all. They didn't harm anyone. They didn't try to, it wasn't a race riot. If there were any fatalities, the fatalities were among the black men, not among the white men, not among the policemen. The policemen were supposed to be shooting in the air, so they claim. But I saw a man get shot in his buttocks, and if the policeman was shooting in the air, the man would have to be 150 feet tall, or the bullet must have ricocheted off a cloud or something.
There is a silent, undeclared war between 117th Street and the police. There has been since long before the Harlem riots. Whether true or not, it is an article of belief among many people in this block that white policemen take pleasure in swinging billy clubs at black heads, and when patrolmen walk this block, they are surrounded by a sullen silence. The police, for their part, know this block is a center for street sales of narcotics. Addicts come here even from other parts of New York to await their connection and buy their fix. The police say 117th is a fairly bad street. 117th says the police take money to look away from narcotics, gambling, and petty crime. Or at least, that's what most people say. There's nothing monolithic about people or their opinions in this block. And if it is a bad block, as the police think of it, that is not the fault of people like Mrs. Willie Mae Anderson. Mrs. Anderson, like many other 17th Streeters, has other things to think about besides the police. She's concerned mostly with finding occasional work for herself. She works downtown in White Manhattan as a part-time maid. Sometimes she sells ice cream in the street when there's no work to be had downtown. Mrs. Anderson is well liked by her neighbors, and she's depended upon by her family, a son, a daughter-in-law, and a granddaughter, and another son who just moved up from Macon, Georgia, to join her in her railroad flat, 4 small walk-through rooms lined up like boxcars, at 136 West 117th, in the middle of this block. All 5 Andersons live together in the apartment. They pay $62 a month rent, and Mrs. Anderson thinks that's too much, considering that the apartment has rats and roaches. When a white policeman shot a Negro boy and touched off rioting in Harlem and created huge headlines around the world, Mrs. Anderson and her family stayed indoors until the storm of anger passed.
Mrs. Anderson, you've lived on this block for 10 years, you say. There's been a lot of talk here about the police. What do you think about it?
Oh, they're much needed, the police. Without the police protection, I wouldn't want to live in the city.
A lot of people here on the block say that they fear the police.
Well, I don't know about the fear because I've always been a law-abiding citizen, and I haven't had any contact with the police. And I believe the ones that are talking about the police all the time, they don't want to abide by the law.
What do you think about all the rioting against the police?
Well, I don't think it was necessary because they didn't have to go on like that. Seemingly, they were up for stealing more than there was about concern of the boy.
Mrs. Anderson's view of the riot is shared by her son, Furman, who is 25 years old. He's the son who's a new arrival from the South, like so many of the people in Harlem, like so many on this block of 117th Street. He is on 117th, but not yet a part of it. Furman Anderson is still holding on to his hope for something better.
Mr. Anderson, how long have you been here in New York City?
3 weeks now. 3 weeks. I've been in New York 3 weeks now.
Why did you leave your home in Georgia to come here?
Well, I'm looking for better work. That's why I'm here, to look for better work. Because work done run out in my hometown.
You say work had run out in your hometown?
Run out, well, it's kind of hard to get a job, but I mean...
What kind of qualifications or experience do they ask for when you apply for a job here?
Well, just ask for the job, what you have did, mostly. See, what most of the job I was doing there, I did construction work, and I also worked at the Dempsey Hotel in Macon. The Dempsey Hotel, and I worked when I was coming up for a grocery store when I was a boy going to school. I was going to school then. I worked for him every afternoon.
What about the people that you've met here on 117th Street? How do they compare with the people back home?
Well, you walk past them and speak to them. Someone won't speak to you back. I don't know. I guess that was the way I was brought up, to speak when I pass people. But you walk past them here and speak, they won't speak back. I don't know. I don't go out too much on the street.
Why don't you go out very much on the streets here?
Well, I saw a little incident the other day out on the streets, and I would rather be inside. There's different things go on out in the streets. I stay on in.
What sort of things go on the street that you're talking about?
Well, such as gambling, all the time they fighting, robbing, all that. I see it go on in the streets.
What do you look forward to as a future here in Harlem?
I believe it's a quieter neighborhood somewhere around. I would like to move my mother away from around it because the fellows walk, they don't have no respect. They cuss all day. They out there gambling all that night in front of her. So I would like to get her in a more quieter neighborhood.
You leave Furman Anderson and his mother in their railroad flat, hoping he does find a job, and hoping he does leave 117th Street, since that's what he wants so much to do. Some people have managed it, but usually on the basis of some special knowledge or ability, which of course Furman Anderson doesn't have. All he has is his hope.
If you begin to get a little tall, I ought to pack up my things and haul. I know a dollar goes from hand to hand. Before I let you go from man to man, I'd rather drink muddy water, sleep in a hollow log. One thing, baby, I can't understand. How come you ain't satisfied with one man? How can you love me and say that you're true? How can you love me and my best friend too? I'd rather drink muddy water, sleep in a hollow log.
117th Street does have its diversions, and one of them is a street band that comes through every day or two. The songs it performs on the stoop are all up-tempo, but they're still the blues.
One of the worst feelings that a poor man has ever had. Now if you got a good woman, take her everywhere you go. If you got a good woman, take her everywhere you go. 'Cause a good woman's hard to find and you can't find them no more. If you begin to get a little tall.
It's astonishing how many people earn a kind of living off 117th in spite of its poverty. The fruit peddler, who has vanished from the rest of New York, still shows up here. So does the snowball man, who shaves a cake of ice and pours flavor on the shavings. You can't get a job without qualifications, one man said, and another answered, I'm qualified, I can shave ice. And even the junk man still comes to 117th.
Well, the blues ain't nothing but a good man feeling bad. Oh, well, the blues ain't nothing but a good man feeling bad. One of the worst feelings that a poor man has ever had. Now, if you got a good woman, take her everywhere you go. If you got a good woman...
There are kids in this block of 117th Street who will spend all summer proving who can throw a bottle cap closest to a front step. There are adults in the block who will spend all summer looking for sevens and rolling threes. But the ultimate diversion of 117th is back in the alley, the white powder and the blunt needle. You can buy half a load of heroin on this block for $1,000 if you've got that much, or a 4-hour fix for $3 if you've got that much. And buy your happiness that way, as long as your veins hold out. Just in case you find this colorful or stimulating in any way, you ought to meet Mrs. Beatrice Jones. She lives over there at number 139 on the 3rd floor. She's lived here for a long time, and she's sick of the blues. Sick of the junk man's wagon and the junkie's needle and the crap games on the sidewalk. She's sick of 117th Street. And unlike Furman Anderson, she has children. Especially for their sake, she's been searching for a way to get out.
Mrs. Jones, what schools do your sons go to?
Well, they were both in Public School 184, which is an all-Negro school. There are a few smothers of around of Puerto Rican children. But on a whole, they're all Negro. And I requested, as I said, when my older boy graduated in June, that he be sent to PS Public School 80, which I understand is in the Bronx. That's an integrated school. And they sent these applications out for us to fill out. And when they were returned, no one got any consideration as to the schools that they wanted the children to go to. Consequently, my son still has to go to Cooper, which is still an all-Negro school.
Well, what was wrong with the elementary school that he was attending?
Well, you know, a lot of people don't think that elementary school is important, you know, where the Negro children are concerned. It's a place to send them to get them off of the streets for 6 or 7 hours. I mean, that's the conclusion that I've drawn from it. And the fact that they passed, a lot of them passed. You know, it's surprising that some of the children can't even spell that come out of these Harlem schools. They can't spell. And it isn't that their parents aren't trying, because I know some who work in the post office, their fathers, and that they're on the, they have civil service jobs, and they try for their children, but they're just not learning anything in these schools.
What about the teachers in those schools? Have you had a chance to meet them?
Oh, I've met each and every one of them. Each and every one. And I guess they do what they can with what they have, which is not very much.
And the discipline in the school, how's that?
I think the majority of them are afraid. I mean, they don't discipline the children anymore. They're afraid. You know, it's gotten so that the children, I mean, they aren't disciplined like they used to be. You know, it seems as if they said, oh, I don't care, you know, you're not going to do anything to me, or you're not going to bother me. And some of them get promoted just so the teachers can get rid of them. That's the truth. Whereas if they were really learning anything, you know, if they were interested in what they were being taught, let's put it that way, that they wouldn't have a chance to be so rude, you know. And a lot of these children, their parents are not even home to supervise them. A lot of them are working. They don't have any place to play. They're in the streets all day long, you know. And it's very bad. There's nothing in the street that's going to teach them anything except bad habits.
After school, here in the home environment, what can your sons do?
Nothing. They have games. They watch television. But remember, they're 11 and 12. You can't keep them in the house all day. And where can they play?
What happens when they leave the house and come out into the street here?
Well, they're just out here. They're just out here. That's all. You don't really know they can't go to the show every day. They have the usual things. They have skates. They have bicycles. But then what else? That's all.
What goes on around them when they're out here playing in the street?
Everything. They're shooting crap. They're using dope. They're alcoholics out here. They're winos. I mean, it's all around them. It's all around them.
During the recent riots and street fightings in this area, what were you doing?
I was in my house with my windows closed.
You're very frightened by it all?
Scared to death. At one period there, I really thought that 117th Street was going to be, you know, passed over with that mess. And then, of course, there were a couple of rowdies who came on the scene, and that was it. That one particular night, they had to get the cops in 117th Street. I was hoping that we would be passed over. But that one particular night, some idiot decided, well, I'll throw a bottle at the policeman, and that was it. But on a whole, this was not a bad area during that riot. It was on Lenox and on 7th, but I don't think it had actually hit 117th Street.
How do you feel about all the rioting and
Terrible.
fighting back the
Terrible, terrible. Very bad. I don't think that we'll ever gain anything by that. Never.
police? Have you made any effort to try to move away from this?
Oh,
law?
yes. Oh, yes. I applied to the projects for the last 4 years, and I was finally accepted. So I felt that now at least my son will go to another school.
We'll continue our visit on 117th Street in a moment, after this pause for station identification.
About 117th Street between 7th Avenue and Lenox Avenue we haven't mentioned yet, and that is that it is falling apart. Too many people in too few rooms for too long, and the rooms are collapsing around them. Some 17th Streeters try to keep their apartments up, some do not. It doesn't really matter very much. The houses are so old, all of them built in the last century, and most of them are in such bad repair that everybody in the block has to live with holes in the plaster and roaches on the walls. The courtyard behind this block is even worse than the crumbling facade in front. The United States Bureau of the Census has labeled 49% of the housing of Harlem officially deteriorating or dilapidated. 117th Street has a little higher percentage than that. The block is simply a prison of rusting metal and rotting brick. The tenants who live in the prison are powerless, most of them, to break out of it. The landlords who might improve it cannot or will not. Banks will not lend money for renovation of such buildings, of course, and some landlords themselves have gone broke on 117th Street and let the city take over their property and board it up. The piles of garbage are particularly high around the buildings the city is responsible for. Ben Holman talked with tenant James McCoy.
This condition has been neglected. It's long overdue that somebody, I feel, should take a more serious interest. After all, we are taxpayers. We work for a living. Many of us work for a living. Many of us, I repeat, work for a living in spite of what you might read about in the papers. I happen to be an employee of the New York City Transit Authority, have been for some 18 years. So I'm one of the working people in this block. But along with that, there are many other people in this block that work and would like to contribute to the betterment of Harlem and New York City with the help of some of the city officials pertaining to housing. I mention housing because housing is terrible on this street.
Well, how bad are conditions here?
You ask me how bad are conditions here. Well, conditions here are terrible, sir. If anybody interested would examine the backyards of 132, 134, you'll find garbage about 5 feet high. Now, surely conditions such as that make it just about impossible to live in this neighborhood. That is my complaint. I have personally made a complaint to the building department of New York City about my particular apartment. As a matter of fact, an inspector has visited my home. After complaining to the inspector remarked to me, "Mr. McCoy, your apartment is in pretty bad condition, but it looks a little better than most people's apartments." That doesn't help the situation any, not at all.
It was an act of providence that the 19th century architects put outside steps on uptown Manhattan buildings. Otherwise, Harlem would have no place to sit down. The overcrowding and the unemployment mean that many 17th Streeters have nothing to do but sit and talk until the numbers runner comes by. And after that, sit and talk until dark. And after that, sit and talk until bedtime. All children play cops and robbers. The unsettling difference on this block is that without a doubt, some children will grow up to play cops and robbers for real. All these things are disturbing to the old-time residents of 117th Street. They can remember when there weren't so many stoop-sitters, when the nice families kept their children off the streets, and they are proud to be nice families still. One such person is Mrs. Alma Hobson. Old resident though she is, her views are not old-fashioned. She disapproved of the rioting, for example, but mainly on the grounds it was in the wrong place. If they were going to riot, she thinks, it should have been downtown in the white neighborhoods. Mrs. Hobson came to Harlem as a child from Charleston, South Carolina, and for 19 years she has been the proprietor of Hobson's Community Pure Food Center down at the Lenox Avenue end of the block. She doesn't own the store building, but she does own the display cases and the stock, and she keeps the store neat and orderly on the inside. During the rioting, she carefully locked up the store and went home. Mrs. Hobson lives across the street from her store at number 124 West 117th, and it was there that her son Ernest grew up. He is a state parole officer now, and in some ways, the block's outstanding success.
This has always been a neighborhood of vice. 20 years since 1941, the area here was a red light district. This block has also been used as a center for policy, which meant that there was the tie-up between the gang lords from Little Italy, which is half a dozen blocks away, and so that the police became, either through their cooperation with the gambling and the racketeers, have gotten in the custom of looking away, or looking the other side, or not seeing.
Is there any hope for 117th Street?
Yes, there's hope for 117th Street. There's hope for all the areas here. But the hope must come first from the people themselves. The decent people of the community must make a stand.
Well, exactly how could people take a stand? Surely rioting in the street isn't the kind of stand you mean.
Well, these conditions have been going on a long time. We've had only one or two riots. This goes on every day. They have sufficient police now to man the corners with flying squads. Yet the condition that prevail here on a day-to-day basis, they can't get one cop to stand one block to disperse a gambling game that's not only setting a bad example for the kids growing up, but is also used to pass drugs, used for the sale of drugs. One cop standing here in this block, doing his job as he's supposed to do, on a day-to-day basis, the 365 days a year, not the one or two nights that they had the rioting, would have done a whole lot to prevent the causes that brought up the rioting. But now I wonder about City Hall, that they could set up an army of policemen, occupy the area, and when we asked last year for a single cop to make this a special post, to stop the gambling in the streets and to keep the drugs out of 117th Street, we couldn't get two cops on a 24-hour basis to prevent crime. But yet, when the rioting comes, they got an army of cops to spare. I don't put all the blame on the police department. I put the rest of the blame on the people in the community, because it's their responsibility to see that the cops do their job. Because when you walk out here and see your kid being influenced by crap shooters, drug addicts, and etc., and you go in and close your door like it doesn't exist, you're just as guilty as the man who eventually put a bag of drugs in your kid's hand when you should have done something about it to begin with.
Ernest Hobson, whose mother sells groceries to 17th Streeters, has revoked the parole of a number of his neighbors. He is universally respected on this block, but naturally enough, he's not universally liked. The most popular man on the block is probably Donald Rogers. He was brought up at number 140, and it was on a stoop just a couple of doors from there that Ben Holman found him, surrounded, as always, by friends. Donald Rogers reflects so many opinions widely held in Harlem that we found ourselves listening to him for quite a long time. As we said in the beginning, people on 117th Street are many and varied, and nobody is the authentic voice of this block, but Don Rogers comes close.
You know, in most communities, people look upon the policeman as their friend, their protectors. Don't the people of Harlem look upon the policeman in that
Well, the
manner?
policeman in Harlem is not the people's protector. He is a man just like the rest, exploits the people and takes advantage of them. You know, he gouges the people like.
Well, when you walk down the street and you see a policeman walking his beat or standing on a corner, what do you think about it? What do you think of him?
I see a fellow that I have more fear for the police than I have for the criminal. Because the policeman can do it and get away with it. I can fight the criminal back. You follow me? If I was being robbed, I could fight the guy, the robber, but what am I going to do with the policeman? You follow me? I have no win there.
Well, have you had any personal experience where police, you think, took advantage of you?
Well, I can recall an incident when we were walking down the street and we were moving a television from one apartment to another for a friend, doing a friend a favor. It was his television. He was with me, and the policeman called us to the side and asked us where we going, what we coming from, and so my friend resented the policeman, more like questioning him about the television, and asked him what's the matter. Ain't he supposed to have a television? He says, no, a nigga ain't supposed to have nothing.
Whom do you think are the leaders of Harlem?
Well, in Harlem, I say that the black Muslims were the leaders. That's what I'd say.
You think they're the leaders of Harlem now?
Well, they seem to be more for the people than anybody else. Because if you watch them, you can see improvement. But you don't see improvement no other kind of way. But when you look at a Muslim, you see a man that you can respect as a person. And when you talk with one, he demands your respect because he always says, sir, to you. What can you say to him but sir?
Well, do you think an organization, or do you think the black Muslims are doing more for Harlem, say, than an old organization like the NAACP?
Well, the black Muslims reaches the people more so than the NAACP. You see, now your NAACP officials, the bigger ones, we don't never see them. They don't understand our problem, I don't think, because they're never here. You got to be with the people to understand the people. You can't be down there on 42nd Street and understand the situation on 116 or 117th Street. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
One of the NAACP officials said recently that if Malcolm X were to try to lead Negroes from the United States to some other land, he wouldn't get 10 to follow him. Is this official
Well, I disagree
wrong?
with them. I'd say this. Malcolm X has more guts than all of them put together because Malcolm X has the guts to say what he wants to say, what they want to say, but they won't say because of their positions. You see, when a Negro works for white people, he can't speak his mind like he wants to because he's jeopardized his position. And I can't go along with him and understand him for the simple reason he's got a family and things to take care of. He's got to have bread, and this is his way and his sauce because this is the white man's country. So he's got to go along with these things. He doesn't even express himself like he wants to when he's in these positions. And I understand why. Because of the necessities of life. But now, like people like Malcolm X, who is not associated with white people, they can say the things they want to say. And the things that they say hold a lot of truth.
Do you think the race problem then is essentially a problem of the Negroes being able to speak up and say what they want to say?
No, that's not only the problem. The problem is the white people accepting Negro people as human beings. That's the whole problem. See, what the white people did to us, they don't want to be sorry for it. It's like an ignorant person who says, I'm wrong, but so what? Now, the white people know the way they treat the Negro definitely is wrong, but they got a so what attitude about it.
Well, it's practically nothing but Negroes here in Harlem. What's wrong with Harlem?
Well, when you throw a bunch of poor people together, what do you think you're going to have?
Everybody is hungry. What do you think you're going to have? Throw a bunch of mad dogs together and what results you get? They're going to eat each other, right?
You know, white folks always talk about the crime in Harlem. What about the crime in Harlem?
What do you expect for it to be in Harlem? Sure, it's going to be crime in Harlem. The policeman don't try to stop the crime. He adds to the crime when he accepts the money from people in graft. If he would do his job, it would be less crime. But Harlem is a place that's being exploited by everybody, not only by the policeman, by the bondsman, by the lawyer, and everybody else. More of the Negroes' dollars go to lawyers, bondsmen, and policemen than any other source. They pay more dollars to them than they do for food. You just look at the court building and see who all's down there. Just go into the jails and see who all in there. It's a situation where the police have no respect at all for the people. Like in other words, the people are supposed to have respect for the police, or the people themselves are due some sort of consideration as people. But they're not treated as people. They're treated as something other than people. Like, I can recall an incident even like last night. Well, after all the riots and the different little, incidents, well, the police were a little tense and whatnot. But now, last night was kind of a warm night. We were all sitting around, standing on the stoops and things of that sort. And we were told to leave, to go away. Well, some fellows said, well, officer, it was kind of hot and we didn't want to go, home at this particular time. We just, just spending a little time, sitting on the sidewalk. It was an early hour, about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and we were told to get out, move, but where you want us to go, They just tell you to keep going, you keep going. Where are you going to go?
Where are you going to go if you live on 117th Street? We heard so many complaints against the police in Harlem that we asked CBS News reporter Sam Roberts to put them to New York's Deputy Police Commissioner, Walter Arm.
Commissioner, there are claims in New York City that the police department here has a double standard of justice. There's one standard for the Negroes in Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant and one standard for the whites. What does the police department think?
Well, I'd like to emphasize as strongly as possible that these claims are unfounded. The function of the police, which they will carry out fully, is to make certain that there is equal justice and equal protection for everyone in this city.
Well, these claims state that aside from the riots, in normal conditions in the Negro neighborhoods, police are free and easy with the use of clubs, for instance.
We deny it, and we say that anyone that has any information to that respect should make their complaint an allegation to the Civilian Complaint Review Board of this department, where it will be fully and thoroughly and impartially investigated.
Commissioner, what about these charges that during the riots, police shot indiscriminately into crowds and not over their heads?
Well, in any case of a direct firing into crowds, as alleged, I only have to point to the low casualty list in the 5 horrible days that we experienced to show that there was only 1 dead and only a certain number of injured, many and most of them not from bullets, but from bricks and bottles.
Now, what about the feeling of the people who live in Harlem about the police force? There are claims that policemen know of graft, of vice going on, of gambling, that they don't bother with the dope addicts. What does the police department say about this?
Well, we say that if anyone has any information of this type, we'd like to have it and take the necessary action that will be indicated. We'd also like to point out that there are reasons why gambling does go on, why there is narcotic trade in Harlem. It's because the people in that area and a lot of other areas insist on gambling, and many of them are victims of the narcotics habit. We are not after the gambler, nor are we after the poor addict. We are after the higher-ups, the suppliers. We're after the bankers in the policy business. We're after the big shots. This cannot be done just by sweeping people off the street who will return to that street tomorrow. It takes long, careful investigation. And what we try to do is get at the source of supply in the narcotics business and cut it off.
Commissioner, are you yourself satisfied with the way the police handled the whole situation this past week?
Again, the word satisfied. We're never satisfied. We hope that something like this would not happen. We are disheartened that it did happen. We feel bad that action had to be taken to break up violence. But we feel that this was incumbent upon this department and that we must meet force with force to contain and protect the people of that community and any other community, and we'll continue to fulfill our job.
But where are you going to go if you live on 117th Street? In spite of all the official concern for law and order, that remains the question. And Dr. Kenneth Clark, the New York City College psychologist and sociologist, has an answer. If you live in Harlem, you're going nowhere. Do you think any good can come out of this kind of violence in the streets?
No, I don't think that good ever comes out of violence as such. Violence is a symptom of the absence of good. Violence is a symptom of horror. Violence is a symptom of social disease, prejudice, discrimination. And I don't think that any good is going to come out of this, because after our elected officials, our police authorities, quiet this violence down, and they will probably put in more police to keep these people under control. All of the abuses that existed in Harlem before the violence will continue to exist. Out of this upheaval probably will not come even the attempt to get a single street more clean than it was before. Out of this will probably not come the attempt to get a decent school where there was none before. What we will have is what we had after the 43 riots. Business as usual.
People on the streets in Harlem think now the city government is going to sit up and take notice of us. You think they're going to be disappointed?
Well, I suppose the people always have to have hope. And maybe it'll be good if they believe this. If the future follows the course of the past, this will be another hope that will be shattered for these people. I personally, as a student of these problems, have no hope that the city government will really be any more concerned about these people now than they were before. If they were concerned, we wouldn't have the combustible ingredients for these riots that we have.
Is there really no answer for the boy on 117th Street? Surely throwing a rock through a clothing store window isn't any kind of answer.
No, it's not going to help him to throw a brick through a window. Throwing a brick through a window merely gets him deeper and deeper in the prison. And instead of having the prison of his community, he will have the literal prison before him. But this is the real devastating thing about Harlem today. The young people, as I've seen them, don't believe that anything is going to help them. Too many of them, for seemingly good reasons, have lost faith in the possibility of help.
As high as you can go on 117th Street is to the 5th floor rooftops. Up there you can keep pigeons, or read a book, or make love, or occasionally be alone if that's what you want, but you cannot go higher. The pigeons can fly away, but the people stay here. Their block is no better than some other blocks in Harlem and no worse than some, but it's their block and there's no escape for most of them. For their children, it could be different. The children learning the small things we all learned, M-I-double-S, I-double-S, I-double-P-I, the children too young for irony. If white New York wonders why there were riots in Harlem, here may be the beginning of an answer. That one generation of Harlem youth threw bottles at the white police in 1943 and nothing changed. That another generation threw bottles at the police last week. And that a single boy, who belongs to still another generation, went wandering this afternoon in the backyard of 117th Street, aimlessly, through a clutter and debris that he did nothing to create.
A good many of the questions raised by the stories of the people on 117th Street must be answered, if they can be answered, by the city of New York, which is why we're here with Mayor Robert Wagner. Mayor Wagner, there was a tone of hopelessness in what we've heard tonight. Is this a justified hopelessness? Is there any chance for the people of Harlem?
Well, there's no question about it, Mr. Reasoner, that many of these people feel hopeless and frustrated. They haven't the opportunities that others have. They live in conditions that certainly don't warrant a good deal of enthusiasm about getting ahead, and feel that nobody really cares about them. But I don't feel they should be that hopeless. Things have been done over the years, and things are being done, and lots more must be done to give them an idea that somebody is concerned about them, their government is concerned, the city, state, federal governments, and also that they give them the opportunity of climbing out of the well into the sunlight. And that has been our objective. Now, many of these things take a good long while, and to try to make up the frustrations and mistakes of the many, many years cannot be done overnight. I certainly am one of those who feel a good deal must be done to step up our programs in job opportunities, in better housing, better educational opportunities. Actually, in the area there, as well as many of the other so-called deprived areas, we have many new housing projects. As a matter of fact, our housing program here in the city, low-cost housing program, is practically larger than all of the other housing programs throughout the country combined. And yet we still have many people living in very bad conditions. In the area of job opportunities, we have set up through JOIN, which is a consolidation with the federal government to help train youngsters. We have Education Second Chance there to give people an opportunity to get basic education so that they then can get off the welfare rolls and get a job. The reason they couldn't get a job before is they lacked that basic educational training. And we do know that we must train, particularly the young people, for jobs that are available. And we must, of course, increase the quality of education, particularly in some of these areas, as exemplified by 117th Street, to see that those schools are brought up in the level. And this is the object, of course, of the Board of Education, too, so that those youngsters there will be getting the same education as other youngsters throughout the city.
Some people say that the only time the city administration notices Harlem is after something violent like last week. Is that...
Well, I think the light of public attention is focused on it, on an area like Harlem and the problems that they have there. But as mentioned, all these programs, they have been going on for a number of years, and one thing we would like to have is more money available to work on all these programs. It's the How You Act program, which is going to be a great help to train a lot of the youngsters with the community participating in its function. And therefore, we're deeply concerned about the passage of the President's anti-poverty bill. We're already, with our programs, to move in to take advantage of the funds that will come from that passage of that bill. We have money set aside in our own budget for the matching funds, and of course we've had to progress on our own with our limited amount of money in some of these training programs and aids to fight the poverty. up to now. I think this is going to be a shot in the arm for us, and we're ready to move ahead. Now, all of these things have been planned, worked on, initiated, put into operation well before any of the disturbances took part last week. But they do focus attention for the general public on the problems there and conditions.
Were you satisfied with the performance of the police department during the riots? Do you believe that they handled them as efficiently and as bloodlessly as possible?
Well, I think everyone agrees that the police department did an exceptionally fine job. Some have had experience in the past. Many of the younger policemen have never had this experience before, and I think everyone's very proud of the way their restraint and their discipline and the way the trouble was contained, and that we have peace at this time, which we hope can continue in the future, and give some hope to many of the people, of course, who didn't participate at all, the hope that we've been talking about here. I would say that the praise for them has been generally throughout the whole city.
Thank you very much, sir. All the scenes in this program were filmed during the last 5 days in Harlem, and the interview with Mayor Wagner was done on videotape this morning at his residence, Gracie Mansion. Tonight, the leaders of the nation's 6 major civil rights organizations asked their people to suspend major demonstrations and picketing until after the presidential elections, to concentrate in the emotional weeks ahead on voter registration campaigns rather than pressing in the streets. It may be that this decision and Mayor Wagner's feeling that there is hope for the youngsters of Harlem and our look at 117th Street have a dual thread in common. One strand of the thread is the realization that the riots bring that our society is a fragile thing depending on the support of its members, and that an area like 117th Street is not far from completely withholding that support. Where that happens, there are just not enough police. The other strand of the thread is the awareness of some of the people on 117th Street that things can be better, are better, in fact, for people on other blocks right in Harlem, and can be even better than that. It is possible to say that among some of the people we've met tonight, their dissatisfaction is a measure of the strength of their aspirations, a feeling that for the first time in civilized history, a nation has the chance, and has gone on record as saying it has the desire, to make a multiracial society where there is real equality. If that could happen, you might, oddly enough, look back sometime on 117th Street between Lenox and 7th in the heat of 1964 as an historic place. This is Harry Reasoner. Good night.
This has been a CBS News Special Report. 117th Street, New York, New York.
Harlem is a place for me. Everybody's talking about Harlem. I'm gonna stay here till eternity. There's a better friend just the other day. He's going to another town. That's where we'll stay. Sleep in Harlem. He said, don't mean no good. Baby, bust a fight, Robbie, don't mean no good. Everybody's talking about Harlem. Harlem is the place for me. Everybody's talking about Harlem.
This program is
This is a report from uptown, from Harlem. Up here, above 110th Street, you enter a very special neighborhood. To the east is the Harlem River and the Puerto Rican. To the west is the Hudson. And on all sides is the color line. And that is what sets Harlem off most from the rest of New York. But Harlem is a part of New York, and when Harlem is troubled, as it has been lately, those troubles may be civic as well as racial. And we are here simply to find out what troubles Harlem now.
It's easy to collect a crowd in Harlem. You never have to go looking for people. There are at least 400,000 in this neighborhood, jammed into a few square miles of tenements, housing projects, brownstone blocks. A city within a city. It has its own local landmarks, its own business sections, its own special atmosphere. Even during working hours, they spill out onto the stoops and sidewalks. With time on their hands, Harlem's working people are caught in the summer doldrums, last summer's doldrums. For up here, they are still waiting for the recession to end. And every evening around this corner, they wait for Lady Luck to come their way. This is the numbers block, where the crowd turns out even in the rain to get the word on the night number, the second payoff of the day, at odds of 600 to 1, on $1, a quarter, or even a dime. For the numbers are the uptown version of the racetrack. And just a couple of blocks away at another corner, you can see the junkies taking up their vigil, waiting to buy the fix. Up here, you sometimes have to overlook vice and concentrate on violence. At a local youth club, CBS News correspondent Tom Costigan talked to a couple of young men who contributed to the violence in Harlem. Two former members of a street gang, now gone straight.
So for fellows who haven't been taken in hand, who haven't been supervised now, what do they do at night? What do they do in the daytime when they're not working, not going to school? What's it like on your block?
Well, the only thing there is to do is stick around the block, hang on the corners. If you can get enough money together, buy beers or something, anything for excitement, just to break the monotony.
You had some fights too, didn't you?
Oh, naturally, yes.
What were they about, do you remember?
But they never had any real reason for just a simple misunderstanding, over-exaggerated, you know.
But at that time you thought it was worth fighting about, huh?
Yeah, at that time, yes.
Did many of the fellows in the gang, were they armed? Were you armed?
At times, yes.
Mm-hmm.
In this incident, adults were armed. No gang fight, just a street corner argument. But it had an edge to it. Knives were flashed. The police stepped in, and a crowd gathered. It was an incident just as routine as this that blew up into last month's near riot. Up here, trouble is routine. Every week, in just one small precinct, less than a square mile, there are 17 cases of assault, 24 thefts. On the average of almost once a week, a homicide or manslaughter. Not an astonishingly high rate, perhaps, when you consider the population of these few blocks, 122,000 people rubbing against each other. The police are probably no tougher on Harlem than they are on any other neighborhood. And Harlem is not so much anti-police as just terribly police-conscious, partly because there are so many cops around. And 6 out of 7 of the police up here are white. Per city block, Harlem seems jammed with police. Per 1,000 population, it has just about the same number as New York in general. But Harlem, they tell you up here, is the only neighborhood in the city that's run by the police instead of by political officials. Anywhere else, they say, if you want something, you go to your district leader. Uptown, if you want something, you have to go to the cops. There are no political leaders, they say, with real influence in the city. A retired policeman with some observations on his old beat and the policeman's role in it. Correspondent Costigan put the questions to George Weber, a former detective who worked this neighborhood as well as others. He's now a Harlem businessman.
Well, Mr. Weber, there has been question raised occasionally about the sending of additional reinforcements into Harlem, police reinforcements, and that has caused in return some apparent tension. What is your thinking on that?
Well, I'm not an authority on strategy as far as
just
police
as your own
department is concerned.
personal.
But I think the more policemen to send up here, the greater attention we'll get.
And is there a great...
I think it's only be a matter of routine. Should be just a matter of routine police work. I say this much, though. They need more seasoned policemen up here. Men that knows the job and men that have previous dealings with colored people and who are interested in the community. Now, another thing that I say that they should have here is more qualified Negroes in executive positions.
You mean in business?
No, in police department. That's right. Like the desk officers and things. So when the people have an occasion to go into these precincts, they see some representative of their own race.
Did you yourself feel any differently when you were assigned to Harlem and then assigned to other sections of the city, white sections of the city?
I didn't. As I said before, if you know your job, you can work anywhere. That's the reason why I suggest that as far as the police are concerned, I think the question of bringing Negro policemen back into Harlem is wrong, because I think they're doing a better job now in race relations by being distributed all over the city of New York. But I say that the men that are sent here, they should be screened. They should be experienced men that knows their jobs, and in case of an emergency, they know just what to do instead of waiting around till someone with experience appear on the scene.
There are different, let's say, psychological problems to be handled in Harlem?
Well,
I mean, among the people, knowing the people?
Well, in the first place, a policeman appear on the scene. If he is experienced, he can handle the situation right away. He knows just what to do. Whereas a young fellow comes up, he walks up to a crowd, he's nervous, he's bewildered, he don't know just what to do. First place, he don't know who to turn to. If there is any such thing as getting information to what actually happened, he's lost.
What would you say causes this nervousness on the part of young or immature patrolmen in Harlem as opposed to other sections of the city?
The old saying that everybody's afraid to come to Harlem. And for what reason, I don't know. I say this much. Any people have been coming to Harlem for years and mind their own business, just like any other section. If you go any other part of the city and try to mind somebody else's business, you get in trouble. The same thing happened here. A person can come to Harlem every day and every night in the week, take care of his own business, mind his own business. Nothing happens to him.
Nothing may happen to the visitor, but for the resident, there's always plenty of action. This is another way to collect a crowd. Just rattle a pair of dice. Even on a drizzly Saturday morning like this, you can always get up a game. The name of this game is stickball, of course. The street curbs shape the ballpark and the ground rules. You never have any trouble filling the bleachers. The problem is to keep the spectators and the delivery trucks off the playing field. The outfielder's name, JJ. He lives 5 walk-up flights above his outfield. Sometimes it seems no matter how hard you run, you're always coming up against a brick wall. So you run in any direction that promises escape, even for just a few moments. The street gangs have left their mark on this block, this territory, as even the little kids call it. The gang itself doesn't operate here anymore. Street workers from the City Youth Board and the Police Athletic League have been moving into the territory, and they've made some headway. Entertainment is where you find it. And uptown, you most often find it in the streets. The crowded streets. But gradually, the uptown landscape is changing. Some tenements giving way before the bulldozers. 36,000 people in Harlem now live in housing projects like these. But still, that's less than 1 out of 10. And new housing doesn't solve all of Harlem's problems. A new house in Harlem is still surrounded by the atmosphere of the ghetto. For 9/10 of the neighborhood, home is more like this. Or like this. Or this. Somebody lives here. His name is Cootie. Cootie has 4 brothers and sisters. They'll show you the scars where the rats have bitten them. Your first terrifying impression when you come in here is fire trap. And it is. Or was. Just a few days ago, a day or two after these pictures were made, the place went up in flames like a haystack. And Cootie and his brothers and sisters escaped the slum on the shoulders of the city firemen. Escaped this slum and went to live in another one. Not all of Harlem is slum or former slum. There are fine old apartments up on Sugar Hill, the Park Avenue of this neighborhood. And way over west, there are fine new apartments. Places where life has the glossy texture of a Sutton place. Once, most of Harlem looked like this. Strivers' Row, goal of the ambitious middle class. But they feel threatened, for the slum blight is spreading. This is Harold Jackman, tenant in one of the newer apartments. He told correspondent Costigan how the neighborhood has changed since he came here as a boy from England.
Well, when I came here, most Negroes lived downtown. And we moved actually from the San Juan Hill District on 62nd Street to Harlem in some years later. Well, Harlem at that time was about 10 blocks, that is Negro Harlem. It was more or less a compact area, and it wasn't, although at that time we were restricted, one didn't have quite the hemmed-in feeling that one has today, that the majority of people have today. Well, after World War I, or during World War I, there was an influx of Negroes from the West Indies and the South in the same area. And houses opened gradually, but even so, there weren't enough houses to accommodate the people. And the landlords were simply interested in getting their rents and not doing much about keeping their houses up.
Well, it's spread out quite a bit since that time, of course, but is it still a ghetto?
Well, to a great degree, it's still a ghetto. In spite of city housing and public housing, the city is still not meeting the needs of the people. It's still a ghetto in the respect that, although it's quite true there's a law that Negroes can live any place they want, that law, I don't know whether it isn't enforced or not, but actually it's not so. Well, in all of New York, of course, there's a housing situation. And we feel that more keenly because the Negro, for the most part, is on the lowest economic rung of the ladder.
Among certain groups in recent months and recent years, there has been a Buy Black campaign indicating a Buy Negro movement. Is this a feeling among all Negroes?
I wouldn't say that, no. I think that buying black is... when you say buy black, actually, what do you mean?
Well, that's what they've been using on the street corners, Buy Black, which means Buy Negro.
Well, I think that I would interpret that as Negroes will go places where they know that sales clerks
are Negroes, where they are buying products from Negro salesmen. But I wouldn't call that buying black. We resent very much if they are Negroes who are selling products. If these products are sold in Negro neighborhoods, and if the white merchants don't patronize the Negro salesmen, we resent that greatly. I suppose you know about this, the liquor deal that's on now, the liquor salesmen protest.
Yes.
The fact that enough of them are not getting orders from the liquor dealers in Harlem.
Well, Mr. Jackman, the criticism has been raised that this, in effect, is the same kind of discrimination that the Negroes were fighting in the past, to discriminate against the whites in favor of Negroes. What is your reaction to that, sir?
Oh, I don't think it's quite the same thing. We just want our part. We want a certain part in this thing. It isn't the same thing. I mean, it seems to me that discrimination against blacks is a 100% thing. No, I don't see it that way at all.
What about politically? There have been campaigns which have been put forth in the past, political campaigns in New York City, which have appealed, in Harlem, let's say, and other sections that are predominantly Negro, have appealed to a Negro voter to vote as a bloc.
Yes, that's true, and I'm all in favor of that, because heretofore the whites have been playing one Negro against the other, and Negroes have realized if we, years ago, we felt if we backed one Negro, no matter what his political affiliations, if we got him in, we would be making some headway. Of course, times have changed, and the major parties have realized that this is the political thing is something to reckon with, and all the major parties have placed Negro candidates on their tickets, but we still feel that enough hasn't been done. We have not been given our fair share in political plums, etc. I think in time to come, if Negroes are represented on all levels of government, then we'll get out of that so-called thinking in terms just of Negro business, and we will have what we are hoping, striving for, integration, because if these Negroes are placed in certain positions and prove themselves, then I think that everybody will cease to think, though of course this is very ideal, cease to think in terms of race.
We have not yet achieved freedom from our slave master. If Africa is free, what you and I should do is study the method by which she attained freedom, reached freedom, got her freedom. What method did she
This man preaches in terms of race and against integration. The white man is the enemy. This is Malcolm X, leader in Harlem of a cult that calls themselves Muslims or Muslims. They are a leading force behind the campaigns to buy black. Part of the doctrine of their national leader, a man called Elijah Muhammad. Outsiders call it black supremacy. Malcolm X calls it black heritage or Negro nationalism. It appeals for Negro unity, and it looks to Africa for inspiration.
He says African. The Egyptians are African. The honorable, my brother who stood here from Egypt is an African. 2 Africans are back there in the corner. You've got all kinds of shades of Africans, just like you have all shades of us here. Everywhere this white man has gone, he has left his mark. So we're going to... President Nasser in Egypt, or of the United Arab Republic, is just as much an African as an African in the Belgian Congo. And if you don't think so, one of the men in the East that the white imperialist, as you call, or the white European, as you call, or the white American, as you call, the devil, who we call, the one of his worst enemies and most feared opponent in the East today is President Jamal Nasser. The man in America whom the slave master fears but respects more so than any black man in the West is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Elijah Muhammad, born Elijah Poole in Alabama, calls himself the Messenger. His Harlem branch, or temple, is in this unimposing building. In other cities, the cult has its own stores and schools. Here, it has only a restaurant. The temple number 7 luncheonette, which doubles as operational headquarters. Periodically, the faithful are summoned to rallies. In between, every evening, there are street corner harangues. For the latest rally, at least 5,000 turned out. The messenger, who works out of Chicago, failed to show up. But the hardcore of his disciples, the trained bodyguards, stood on duty for hours. Neat, orderly. Courtesy, they say, is part of their creed. Just how many converts they've made in Harlem, this is hard to say. Perhaps 1,000, possibly 5,000 or 10,000. By many people in Harlem, their influence is discounted. By others, it is deplored. But the message is being circulated. A strong tonic being offered as a cure for Harlem's troubles. The troubles we've already examined, and some others which we'll look into in just a moment, when we resume with part 2 of Harlem, a self-portrait. Harlem after dark. The bright lights and the strong beat used to bring white tourists uptown. But in recent years, the color line has sharpened. And Harlem at night is an almost all-Negro town. In the local night spots, you seldom see a white face anymore. Night and day, Harlem life is chronicled by Langston Hughes. Most of these books carry his byline. He's a poet, folklorist, humorist, and jazz lover. Some of his printed lyrics are being read to jazz in the downtown night spots. As a longtime observer of the local scene, Hughes was asked if there was anything special about Harlem's problems.
I would say that there are some problems that are different. The very fact that Harlem is 90% a Negro area brings problems that other parts of the city may not have. The fact that a large portion of our population is from the South, and many of them in recent years, particularly since the war. And sometimes the old problems of the South come up here with the newly arrived people. They bring along some of the deep resentments that have come out of a lifetime of segregation and Jim Crowism, you know? And almost everybody in Harlem, I suppose, like almost everybody in New York, is really from somewhere else originally, you know? I'm from Missouri a long time ago, in the Middle West. But having lived here a very long time, I feel, of course, now that I'm a Harlemite. And I don't believe that our problems are as aggravated as sometimes the magazines and newspapers make out.
There have been reports and indications from some sources that tension in Harlem is increasing in recent months.
I would not agree with that. Having been here myself in the days when tension was very high, in the days of the Ethiopian-Italian War, for example, in the days of the picketing of the 125th Street shops because Negroes couldn't work or didn't work as clerks in shops even in their own neighborhood, I would say that there's nowhere near such tension as there was then.
then you had the feeling that there might be a race riot, and there was race riots, as you know. Today, I don't feel that myself in Harlem at all. I do feel in Harlem a very deep interest in all of the things that concern the Negro people, a deep interest in Little Rock, for example, a deep sense of shock when Mac Parker is lynched. But I don't feel an intense racial bitterness, shall I say, such as one might have felt here 20 years ago. I myself do not find Harlem an unpleasant community in any basic sense. You walk down 7th Avenue, there are trees down the middle of the street, there are brightly lighted shops and stores and bars and cabarets, and there are people who look happy and who seem happy, and in my opinion, Harlem is basically a joyous community in spite of all its problems, and it's a community that a great many Harlemites love very much, and the fact that sometimes we make a great deal of noise about our problems, well, we hope that they will be remedied, and some of us think that by making a lot of noise about them, it'll make other people think about them, and maybe the ugly aspects of Harlem will gradually begin to disappear, as some of them are.
One question about police activity. What is your feeling when extra police, reinforcements are sent into Harlem?
Well, sometimes we feel that there seems to be a kind of police invasion of Harlem, in that you see on almost every corner at times 2 or 3 policemen, and many of them are white. Now, I don't believe that we have any right to have any feeling against the white police, because they are part of the police department of the city of New York, as are the Negro police. But unfortunately, Harlem being a 99% black community, when on every corner you see just white police, sometimes the residents sort of feel like, well, we are occupied, you know? And this, I don't think, is the fault of the police department at all, because I thoroughly agree with Kennedy's statement that the police department has to be integrated, that there should be integrated police in Harlem as in other communities of New York. And it's just unfortunately the fact that Harlem is a ghetto community, so sometimes this black-white thing reacts adversely for everyone.
Is there open resentment at any times against white policemen?
Well, only in times of tension, I think. Again, to go back to the Ethiopian War, or I think for a time when there was so much tension in Little Rock, it seemed that there was an increase of police here in Harlem, as if they were afraid something was going to happen here, you see. And most of the police sent here seem to have been white, and many of them seem to have been quite young fellows who, I must say, looked a little bit afraid.
There have been certain movements in recent months, again, that perhaps they can't be classified under tension, but let's indicate the movements such as the Buy Black campaign and the proposed picketing of liquor stores in Harlem in order to persuade dealers to deal only with Negro wholesale salesmen. Is this an indication of another feeling, a heightening of the desire to get out, to spread out, to integrate?
No, I would say that this is simply an extension of the same feeling that caused the Negro peoples of Harlem to picket shops back in the 20s, in which they couldn't work. I think the basic problems of Harlem, of course, are economic, and the fact that the Negro people cannot get jobs as easily as people who are white all over New York, and in a sense that is true in Harlem. So much of the business in Harlem is owned by people who don't live here. You see them during the week, you don't see them on Sunday at all. They're just not here. They've gone home to their nice houses up in the country somewhere, out on Long Island, you see. The same thing is true of the housing situation. Much of the housing in Harlem is not owned by Harlemites at all. Where it is, you usually find the house well kept when it's a privately owned house. But much of the housing is owned by absentee landlords or by banks or mortgage associations, and they just simply take the rent, let the house run down, and enjoy the fruits of the income in other communities, very little of the money coming back to Harlem. And so, of course, Harlem's feeling is that what we spend here in Harlem, why can we not also profit by some of that money coming back to us?
Since there are so many white owners of businesses and apartment houses, tenement houses in Harlem, why is it that more Negroes have not gotten into the field?
Well, there are many reasons, of course, beginning with the fact that when the Negroes were freed from slavery, they were freed with nothing, so it's taken them a considerable little while to work up to any people with large sums of money to purchase houses or start businesses or own real estate. But when one does acquire enough money to perhaps go into business, if you are colored, you run into many problems that other people don't run into. For example, here in Harlem, for a long time, it was almost impossible for a Negro to rent ground floor space on 125th Street. All of the shops from river to river on 125th Street, owned by whites, run by whites, managed by whites. Then if a Negro were able to rent space, always the problems of loans. They're not as easy for us to get as other people. Loans to start your business, to get your stock. And then the problems of insurance. It's incredible how many insurance problems there are for Negroes and for Harlem. A great many types of insurance seemingly just cannot be gotten in Harlem if you're colored.
The street signs say 125th Street. 25th Street is what they often call it up here. The world begins at 110. I would rather be a lamppost on 25th Street than a king in Alabama. Old Harlem saying. Still, a man isn't always free in his own backyard. Any man in his 40s can remember when Negroes had to sit in the balcony at the Apollo Theater. Not any longer. He can remember when there were no Negro clerks in the stores right here on the Negro Main Street. There are plenty now. When Negroes just weren't served in some of these restaurants. There's a law against that now. But the color line is far from gone. There is one restaurant up here that represents an important new breach in the color line. It is just about to open with a blast of neighborhood fanfare. CBS newsman Richard Gibson asked its owners what the excitement was all about. The owners, Frederick Weaver, Gertrude Brown, and Lloyd Von Blaine.
Mr. Blaine, how do you explain your success in getting a lease after so many Negroes failed?
Well, Dick, by hard negotiation and frankness, we told the landlord that we felt that he didn't want to rent us because we were Negroes. And after about several days of discussion, we brought up to him certain incidents that were happening in Harlem, where we felt that we should be given an opportunity to express our talents, regardless of our race, creed, or color, that we had the ability and financial ability and ability to produce, and we wanted to compete with the rest of the merchants on this block, or any block that we might be in, that we shouldn't be denied that particular right. We brought certain documents to him to show him that we were qualified.
Do you feel that the landlords, that many landlords thought or think that Negroes just aren't qualified, that they don't know how to operate efficient businesses?
That was definitely his indication when we discussed it with him about 4 or 5 days. And we even offered him a binder the first day. And it was unusual for a landlord to not accept a binder when you advertise a store for rent. And he refused the binder. So we brought my other associate in, Mr. Weaver, and Miss Brown here. And what was your impression, Miss Brown?
Well, that was certainly my impression, Vaughn, and I think, too, that we have sort of set a precedent on West 125th Street. And there are now 2 other vacant stores, and I'm sure, using the same kind of tactics we use, that they would be able to rent them.
All right, Mr. Weaver?
Well, I think that's about correct. They use various methods to keep us off. They don't tell you that they don't want to rent the Negroes. They usually make their rent so prohibitive that you can't afford to rent. For example, we are paying here for this spot that you can see the same amount of rent that the former tenant was paying for this floor and the floor above. We are paying that same amount just for this one spot. And then after the landlord decided that he was going to rent to us, he changed his mind over the weekend after he signed the binder with us. And in his lawyer's office, he wanted to break off the lease. He didn't want to rent for 10 years because he thought money would be made, and he had undersold the lease hold that he had agreed to rent his property to us for. But all up and down the street, as Ms. Brown was saying, there are 3 vacant stores in this block now. This store here was vacant 9 months, waiting for some chain store, somebody who lives out of the community to come into it. And what we told the landlord was that the sentiment and the temper of this community is such today that we will not tolerate out of the community business people coming into 125th Street, making the money, when there are people in the community with the same economic resources, the same ability to operate the business successfully, and they're going to give their preference to someone who does not live in the community to come in. And I think through that type of brainwashing, if you want to call it that, we were able to whip him down and let him know that anyone coming out of the community, in preference to us, when we had the first choice on the place, we were the first to approach him about a restaurant, would not be able to operate that business successfully. And I think I speak for the community in that regard.
Do you think this had anything to do with the Buy Black movement? Do you feel that at least influenced?
I don't think Buy Black had anything to do with it. We're not here to run a black restaurant, a white restaurant, or any other kind of restaurant. We are here to make money like any legitimate businessman wants to make. If Howard Johnson wants to make it, to use a name, we want to make it too if we have the resources and the know-how. It's not associated with any race or any cult or any type of thing like that. It's the fact that people who live in Harlem have been economically repressed. We cannot expand because we can't get the property in which to rent. And if we can't get the place in which to rent, we can't make money.
And you know, Fred, there are a lot of our personal friends who know us very well.
That's right.
Still do not believe that we have negotiated a lease.
That's true.
On the storefront property on 125th Street, and a lot of times they ask us if we are in the RPs in the back.
Well, just yesterday, one of my good friends who's a newspaper man wanted to know who our 4th partner was. He still believes that there must be some person who is not Negro behind us, that we don't have the money or that we were not able to by ourselves successfully negotiate a lease on 125th Street. They don't believe it.
That gives you an idea, Dick, of how impossible it has been for Negroes to rent on West 125th Street.
Well, you just have to walk up and down this street and look at any storefront from Lenox to 8th Avenue and find a Negro who is leasing property in his own right.
Oh, he's operating the business.
This is the very heart of Harlem, the business center of Harlem. But I understand, Mr. Blaine, that you once operated the same type of business, a restaurant, here in New York, but not in Harlem, in a predominantly white neighborhood. Is that correct?
It was in Greenwich Village. And the peculiar thing about it was that we spent several days looking for location. Of course, Greenwich Village is a tight spot for a storefront, vacant storefront. When we did finally find one, we walked in the place. The landlord was there, my associate and I, and he knew we were colored. And he said, "You want to rent the place?" He said, "Sure." I told him what the rent was. We gave him on the spot a retainer, a binder. The next day went back and signed the lease without any problem whatsoever.
In other words, you had no discrimination outside of Harlem.
There's no discrimination in leasing and no discrimination in taxing.
But paradoxically enough, Harlem, the Negro community of New York City, the largest Negro community, is one where you find the greatest amount of discrimination against Negro.
Right in this area.
Right in here.
Most Harlem business is small business, and lots of it is conducted right out on the street. The icy man, the uptown version of the good humor. For a nickel or a dime, you get a scoop of shaved ice and a spray of syrup. 12 delicious colors and one flavor, sweet. And then there's the watermelon man. Nowadays it's 60 cents for an armload. Another familiar street scene, the checker players. But most prevalent of all on every Harlem street are the kids, the school kids. And the scars on the school buildings are just the kind of attrition that sometimes occurs between terms and during terms. Harlem also has new schools, buildings in perfectly good shape. Good or bad, it's not the school buildings that parents are so upset about, it's the quality of education. Community support is being mobilized on behalf of permissive zoning, the right to send your child to a school outside the neighborhood. Parents' groups meet regularly to discuss school problems. And in a beat-up meeting hall the other day, they stayed after to give us their views on this issue and others. A mother of 9, critical of schools. She was asked what she thought the trouble was.
A great deal of the fault is teachers, for the simple reason that teachers, if they had a better attitude toward our Harlem children, if they had a more broad-minded attitude that all children are able to learn as they started out, and given a good curriculum, they would be better equipped.
Do you say that the attitude of the teachers, or some of the teachers, is not broad-minded?
Some of the teachers. Attitude has a great deal to do with it.
Well, you would speak, of course, to your children about their school problems practically every day.
Definitely.
What do they think, what do they tell you about it? Do they have any resentments? Do they feel that there's something that they want?
Well, children always want something. Children go to school very eager to learn. And I find it regrettable that they're so readily stymied. They start out on the same by comparison to other communities, but quickly you find that they're behind in so many areas. And it certainly isn't the child's fault. And knowing from my own children, we stress education. We want to see our children educated. We want to see them get ahead. And it's regrettable to find that I know of my own children who have the ability to learn have found it very difficult to bridge the ills in the school.
Another parent and another question. Life in New York as a whole and the problem of discrimination.
Well, it's very hard to say. I haven't been living in Harlem but about 4 years. Before I lived in Brooklyn. And then there are certain places that when we do go in different restaurants or different places that you're the last one that they wait on, and other people can come in and they wait on right then. And so, well, I guess we still find that is down south as well as we do here in New York.
Does it make you angry?
Well, at times it does. But a lot of times if you know that if you go in there it's trouble, it depends, you know. Sometimes we say, well, I am an American and I have a right to go into that place. So you go in, and sometimes you are treated as if you're not even there. And then there are some restaurants that I can say that are very patient for anyone that comes in.
Well, I feel that while the school situation is about the most important, I feel that much could be done as far as housing in our area, overcrowding, much higher rents paid than other people, poor facilities. Then getting away from housing, I feel that our hospital situation is another area that much could be done. We have a new building that has been sitting there at 136th Street and Fifth Avenue for some 20 months long overdue. And I imagine because of the political situation, perhaps that may have been a factor in the fact that it's just beginning to be open this week. There are other areas as far as economics. They say that we're economically low, culturally deprived, which is all a lot of nonsense, which they very well themselves know, those people that give the excuse. But we can't help but be economically deprived when the merchants come into the area and sell us inferior food, inferior clothing, and any other commodity you could possibly name at a much higher price than in other areas. Then you could go into politics. I think that perhaps if more political patronage were paid to the citizens of Harlem, who they very well depend greatly upon for votes, some of these ills could be corrected, because we would have our own interested people that come from the Harlem area, that live and that have been born more or less from the Harlem area, to personally look after some of these inadequacies.
Finally, a teacher looks at the school situation from a Harlem viewpoint.
I look at it with mixed feelings. On one hand, I see a city such as New York, which has the finest pronouncements of education that you'll find in the country. That goes for integration as well as ideals. On the other hand, I see in Harlem, in Marcigny where I teach, in the Bedford-Stuyvesant areas, and in several other enclaves, standards which I would term educational anemia. I think that the quality of education in these schools are such that they're not preparing youth for the job that we have to do in the world tomorrow. I can cite my own example. I teach at PS2 in the Bronx. I've been there for 12 years. Over those 12 years, we've had perhaps all of our staff to leave, and then leave again, and then leave again. I've seen 3 principals. When I return to school in September, there'll be no principal, and nor will there be one or any of the 3 assistant principals that are attached to my school. I think that these enclaves, or these segregated ghettos, are the basic reason why we have this turnover of teachers. I feel that teachers are not the most important thing, of course, in this whole picture, but the children. As victims of this segregated community, they live in a situation in which health, housing, and schools are below the standards for any American citizen. I think that the curriculum in these schools is such that the Board of Education must take direct action. That this does not require money at all. It should certainly take steps to see that experienced teachers and experienced supervisors are provided so that these children will have equal opportunity with the rest of the children in New York City.
There is no typical Harlem house or Harlem street or Harlem's voice. It's a big neighborhood with all kinds of individual differences. But what we have seen and heard is representative of a neighborhood mood, a local spirit. That mood is restless, even angry, about housing. The bulldozers just can't seem to keep up with the decay. About economic conditions. Well, job opportunities for Negroes are greater than ever before, but still, as they say, the Negro is the last to be hired and the first to be fired. And Harlem businessmen complain about discriminatory practices right here on their own home ground. And there are complaints, too, about hospitals, about schools, about sanitation. In city services, Harlem feels it's being shortchanged. The police question, which started the current anxiety, is not a critical one, but it is significant because it points up most painfully the Negro's lack of status as a force in the affairs of the city. What hurts most is that the police are the power up here, The police and not the politicians. You keep hearing that time and again. And the police are run by whites, just as the city is run by whites. Now, what Harlem wants is political leadership to replace that police leadership. That means local men, Negroes in high city positions, men who can translate the needs of Harlem into action for Harlem. The trouble in Harlem, then, is primarily a civic and not a racial one. But the extremists are on the street corners and in the meeting halls, trying to whip this civic issue into a racial one. And as long as Harlem remains physically a racial ghetto, there's a standing invitation to more trouble here in New York. This is Bill Leonard. Good evening.
This has been a presentation of the WCBS-TV Public Affairs Department.